Hi, I'm David Levine. Thank you for tuning in. Um, my guest tonight is Liz Heinecke. She's the author of the book Radiant. Here it is. It's called The Radiant, the Dancer, the Scientist, and Friendship Forged in Light. Liz has an undergraduate degree in art from Luther College, a master's degree in bacteriology from University of Wisconsin-Madison, and worked as an academic molecular biology researcher before starting her wildly successful online educational platform, kitchenpantryscientist.com. So Liz, you want to join me? Okay, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. So I showed your book, so you'll show it later to tell people how to get it. So you said that you were an art major in college, right?
Yeah, I started off in biology and music, actually. Decided then I didn't want to be a band director and I didn't like organic chemistry. So after visiting Paris in college, I decided to change my major to art. So I ended up graduating with an art major and a biology minor.
Okay, for people who don't know about this book, tell them what it's about.
So this book is about the friendship of the scientist Marie Curie and the dancer inventor Loie Fuller, who sort of revolutionized. She was one of the creators of modern dance, essentially, but also revolutionized stage lighting, right? Sort of when electrical light became widely available. And the two of them met because of radium. And so I was able to write a lot about science in this book, about Marie Curie's work and her struggles and their friendship, and also just the incredible number of things that both women accomplished. And they met periodically throughout the years. So I sort of wrote about the years when they knew each other, when they came to Paris and when they knew each other.
So you wrote that Loie had manipulated electrical light into a transformative tool for theater, dance, and design, but she's not really known today.
No, and I've wondered why she's not known. I mean, I think a few years ago, Taylor Swift actually sort of brought her back into the spotlight because Loie Fuller spent her whole life trying to patent her inventions, and was really struggled with that. So it's sort of a modern issue too, copywriting work. And I think it was only like very recently that people have been able to patent dances. But yeah, I think one reason people don't know about her is because she was involved in so many things. And her contemporary was Isadora Duncan, whom a lot of people are more familiar with, who know anything about dance. But Isadora Duncan was your more typical starlet. She was very beautiful, willowy, this incredible dancer, that super popular with the press. And Loie Fuller was also very good with the press, but for whatever reason, people just don't know about her, and they should, because every time you go to a theater today, they're still using lighting techniques that are related to her inventions. So she's kind of a big deal.
She's an American.
She's an American. She was born just outside of Chicago to a very poor family. Her father was sort of a horse. He was in all kinds of business. They lived in Chicago around the time of the big fire, but they moved around a lot. And she started acting at a young age. So she actually was initially an actor. And for a while, she was a temperance lecturer as a child. She has a really interesting youth in America. But then when she was 30, she went to Paris because she had created this dance. She would put on these white, voluminous white skirts, and she sewed wands into them that she would hold in her hands, and she would manipulate the fabric into all these beautiful geometric patterns. And then she would light her dances using electrical light. She actually made, this is a cool science thing, I tried it. The lighting gels are called lighting gels because they're actually made out of gelatin. So she would make lighting gels out of gelatin, and she would put them in these wheels that they almost looked like a painter's palette. So there were different colors, and they could spin it in front of the spotlight and illuminate her dances with a colorful electric light. So people in America were stealing her dance. It was called the Serpentine. And so she took it to Europe and discovered that people there were copying it too, but her technology was so much better that she almost immediately became the most famous dancer in Paris. So she was really a character, a really interesting person.
Now, she crossed lives with a lot of people. Before I get to Madame Curie, she crossed lives with Thomas Edison first, right?
Yep.
Before she went to Paris.
She had been in Paris. She came back to the States frequently.
Okay.
So she came back and she visited his lab, which it's a great story.
It is a good story. She knew Edison. She knew Rodin.
Yep.
As you mentioned, Isadora Duncan.
Yep.
And she met the young Picasso.
She met the young Picasso. Yep. And Camille Flammarion, the famous astronomer. She was very good friends with him too.
Okay. So how did she meet Marie Curie?
So Loie Fuller was very interested in the latest things. She was always watching trends, which was one thing that made her so successful. And Marie Curie had discovered radium, and the Paris paper, she discovered radium and was working to purify it. And the Paris papers were really excited about it. So they wrote about this glowing new discovery. They talked about how the purified radium salts in the dark would glow with this blue light. So Loie Fuller thought, hey, wouldn't that be cool if I could light my dancing robes with this? I could dance in the dark and have a blue illuminated costume. So she wrote a letter to Marie Curie asking for some radium. She wrote actually to Marie and Pierre, and they naturally said, no, they were struggling to purify radium. It was very precious at that time. They didn't know the extent of how dangerous it was, but they knew it could burn you. So they said, sorry, but Loie Fuller was very persistent, and she said, well, thank you for answering my letter. And she insisted on coming to dance for them at their home. And she and Marie became friends, and they were friends from that time until their deaths. So.
And she was one of the few people who actually got to go to their home.
Yes, they were very particular. They were very private people. They hated the spotlight. They mostly hung out with other scientists. I think they were famous for having, a lot of them, they vacationed together. They gathered at the Curie house. And so there weren't many outsiders that would come into that group. So yeah, a few of Marie's students, maybe from the school where she taught, but it was very unusual for them to invite people into their house. And Loie danced for them there, I believe, several times. And I think they came to her home, and she danced for them there, her studio, she danced for them there too.
So is part of the basics of their friendship is that both Marie Curie and Loie Fuller both felt a little bit overlooked in some ways?
That's a good question. Yeah, I would imagine so. They were both living in a world. Paris at that time was extremely sexist, and Marie was facing a lot of sexism in science. Pierre was very supportive, but other than that, she didn't have a lot of support. And
that's her husband.
Pierre, yes, Pierre Curie. He won a Nobel Prize with her for physics. He was very supportive, but Loie Fuller also they were both very determined women who realized they were probably the two hardest working women in Paris. I would say that Loie probably didn't face as much discrimination as Marie did, but she had to fight actually to be recognized as an artist rather than a dancer, because at that time, dancers and people in the theater were sort of thought of as, prostitutes. So a lot of them were, but they weren't very well respected. And Loie was trying to be recognized as an artist rather than, a can dancer or whatever.
And she was always broke, it seems.
Yeah. Well, I think they really bonded over science too. I think Loie wasn't very well educated. She was a lot like Thomas Edison. She hadn't had much of a formal education, but she loved science and invention. And she would spend every penny she got. I mean, once she visited Edison's lab and learned about the glowing salts, she spent every penny she had buying up chemicals and trying to, she set up her own lab. She would buy microscopes. She dumped a lot of her money into research for her art, basically. But I think one reason she loved Marie Curie so much is because she was fascinated by science. she respected her hugely for her mind and what she was doing. But I think Marie was also a very good teacher and was really kind about like explaining things to Loie. Loie would come to their lab and they would show her tubes of radium, and even she'd come to the lab and Pierre would show her equipment and show all kinds of things. So I talk about that in the book quite a bit.
Yes, it's a very entertaining book. It's fun to read. There's also been some movies lately about the movie Radioactive was on, which was on Amazon.
Yeah.
And then I saw the Radioactive Girls is streaming on either Amazon or Netflix.
Radium Girls. Yeah. I haven't watched that.
Radium Girls. Yeah.
Yeah. I talk about the Radium Girls in my book.
Right.
I haven't watched it yet just because I read the book. It's so depressing. Like
it is.
These poor young women who were just trying to work in the factory and they ended up with horrible, disfiguring, deadly cancers. But that's a really good book, Radium Girls. I would recommend. The movie. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to explain to people that they got radiation poisoning from painting watch dials with self-luminous paint.
Yes, so they would mix zinc sulfide with a little bit of radium in it. The radium would make the zinc sulfide fluoresce. They would mix it with a little bit of glue and they would paint watch dials. And the problem was that in order to keep their brushes sharp, they would mix it and then it's called lip pointing. They would actually use their mouth to get their brushes into sharp little points so they could make nice marks on the dials. So these girls, the thing that's really dangerous about radium is that it contains alpha, beta, and gamma radiation, but the alpha radiation is it's helium particles, but it can't penetrate things like paper. So if you ingest it, it can't get out of your body. So, and it's, I believe it's very similar. It looks very similar to calcium. So your bones will actually take radium up. It can't escape your body and it will just, the energy that it's releasing will destroy your bones and cause mutations. So it's really, radium is a really horrible thing to ingest. And these girls were just basically eating it.
And you also talk about radium eyes. Radium
eyes? Oh, you mean that Marie's eyes were so damaged by radiation?
Yes.
Yeah. So Marie was exposed. It's amazing that she lived into her 60s because she was exposed to enormous amounts of radiation, but she had several cataract surgeries. She was exposed to radon gas. She would actually, during World War I, she would actually bottle radon gas in little glass vials they used for medical treatments. But the radiation from the materials she worked with gave her really, really bad cataracts. So they also I have a chapter called The Girl with Radium Eyes, because when Marie and her daughters came to America, they had an American woman who had raised money to buy Marie a gram of radium because America was producing a lot of it and Marie couldn't afford to buy it for her own lab, even though she discovered it. And when they came to America, Marie's daughter, Irene, she was a scientist. She was very, very smart. And her daughter, Ev, was very, very beautiful. And they called Ev the girl with the radium eyes. She just had beautiful eyes. And that was the American nickname for Marie's daughter.
But the other daughter won the Nobel Prize also.
Yes, Irene won the Nobel Prize. She was brilliant. And she followed in Marie's footsteps and discovered artificial radioactivity. She discovered that a radioactive substance could make the things around it radioactive. So
one thing I like about your book is you have a lot of photographs of some of the dances. So can you describe to the audience listening, how did she use light? How did she use light in the performance?
So I have a great illustration in my book that's actually from Scientific American magazine. I forget what the date is, maybe probably 1896 or something. But it shows how she would have a crew of, 8 or 10 men usually operating all her lighting equipment. And it shows how she had set it up. So I mentioned they had these big wheels with different color lighting gels that they would rotate in front of spotlights. So they would have those going. And then she also had like a glass block on the stage that she would stand on and do her dances, and it could be illuminated from underneath. So they'd have someone under the stage. So she could look like, she had something called the fire dance. She could look like a giant flame. But she had all her technicians trained so that when she tapped her foot a certain way, they would know when to change the color or when to change the light. So she, like I said, she just worked really hard, and she trained her employees endlessly to get this right. But it was art, so every time she danced, it would be a little bit different. But they knew when to shine, the red light on her, the yellow light, or the rainbow of lights, whatever.
And she would get standing ovations and great reviews and everything.
Yeah, they throw violets on the stage. She would get carried off. I mean, Paris loved her. And what's really amazing about her is that she was popular for so long. She just kept inventing new things. Like she would project images on sheer fabric and then or light on sheer fabric and have other images behind them. She just did a lot of things that no one had done before. So she managed to keep finding new ways to bring art to the French, and they loved it. She was never as popular in the United States as she was in Paris.
All right, so there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. Don't put them in the chat box. The Q&A box is for questions, and we'll get to those. So did you write this book? When did you start writing this book?
I just thought today, I think I finished it about a year ago. I started writing it. So it was published in February, and it took me about 3 years start to finish. So I had run across Loie Fuller's name and just started reading and reading and reading. And once I probably spent about a year, I write kids' books too, so I was busy working on kids' books, but I probably spent about a year sort of reading and figuring out what I wanted to do. And then my agent took it to an editor and they bought it. And then I had about another year to finish writing it. So I wrote it pretty quickly, but would have been nice to have another 6 months, but it was fine. And like I said, I just had such a good time writing it. I went to Paris because I've been to Paris, but I wanted to see the places where these women worked and where they lived. And if you ever go to Paris, go to the Curie Museum. It's incredible. It's the old Radium Institute that Marie built. It was Marie and Pierre's dream, but Pierre died. He got hit by a wagon
A carriage.
A carriage, yeah. It was actually a huge, carriage or wagon, and killed before he could realize the dream, but Marie built it. And it's cool. I went in there, they have the piezoelectrometer that Marie used, and they will actually like open it up and show you how it works. And it's a pretty complicated piece of equipment. So it was really, really neat to have them demonstrate it. But they also have lots of things. A lot of people don't realize that radiation therapy came to be because of Marie's discovery of radium. She discovered radium, and Pierre and some other people realized that it burned skin. If they leave it in their pocket, their skin would get burned. So they would test it to see what happened. And then they realized that, hey, we could maybe put some of this on a tumor and maybe it would burn the tumor away. And it did. And that was the beginning of radiation therapy. So they have lots of cool stuff about, and it was initially called Curie therapy, but there's lots of cool stuff there about Curie therapy. You can sit in the courtyard where Marie used to sit, and there are still plants there that she planted. You can see her lab where she worked. It's just, it's amazing. And it's right next to you can't see the courtyard where they made their initial discovery in the Physics Institute, but that's right nearby too. So you can walk over and see that.
Well, she also talked about she had burnt fingernails.
Their fingers were cracked and burned from working with radium. Yeah. And Pierre, he died because he got hit by a carriage or a wagon, but he would have he clearly had some severe illness that had, most likely been caused by his work with radiation. And one thing that kind of boggled my mind as I was reading about this and writing about how they slowly sort of realized the long-term dangerous effects of radium. They were mouth pipetting in their lab. They were mouth pipetting radioactive elements. It's hard for me to fathom that. But sometimes people would, mouth pipette in some mesothorium or something and get really sick. But the safety standards, it's incredible to read this book and see how the safety standards have changed. Because at the beginning there weren't any. They just didn't. It's like a lot of new technology. You don't always know what you're dealing with right at first.
At the end of her life, she did warn about it, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it was in I have to look. It was I think it was in 1929. She was in America collecting a 2nd gram of radium, and she actually gave a speech where she basically said, you need to have standards. The public shouldn't be working with, this was when they had, for years before they had, radium toothpaste, radium water. People were dying because radium was completely unregulated and people were putting it in everything. So she made a speech saying, we need to be careful with this stuff, basically.
Now, she also met a lot of interesting people. She was friends with Einstein. They corresponded. She was friends. There's actually a photograph of her with Einstein at the Solvay meeting.
Yeah, so they met that's where they met. They met at the Solvay meeting, the first one, I think.
Right.
And they really liked each other. They really got along well. And he visited her in Paris over the years. But I write about, Albert Einstein and his son went backpacking with Marie and her 2 daughters in the Swiss Alps. And I just think that's incredible. I mean, that's a lot of genius in one backpacking trip.
Yeah.
And he respected her as a scientist. And I think that, and that picture at the Solvay conference that I have in the book is so amazing. She's the only woman, and she is with all these men who were, the giants in physics. And I think it was really important that all these men respected her, because it made an example for some other colleagues who may not have had treated her as well. So
I never thought of her as a physicist till I read your book. I always thought of her as medicine and radiation.
Chemist.
Yeah, chemist. Well, she won the Nobel Prize in chemistry too.
Yeah.
So,
Well, part of that might be when she visited America the first time, because she was a woman, it was sort of acceptable for women to be healers in the medical role. And they really used propaganda of Marie as, a wife and a mother who's come up with this thing that's going to heal all these people. At the time, radium was supposed to be the great healer of all things, the great medicine. So she was a physicist. She was a mathematician, physicist, chemist, but probably first and foremost a chemist. But she, people tend to think of her as associate her with medicine.
But also, when you read the book, she also didn't have besides her husband dying, she suffered from depression at different times in her life. She suffered from tremendous weight loss at times, and never really felt good.
No, she had terrible health problems. And her mother, she lost her mother and her sister as a child in Poland. Her mother died of tuberculosis. Her sister died of typhus. She was very depressed then, and then, suffered periods of depression throughout her life. And it was exacerbated by her health problems as she got older, most of which were caused by working with radiation. But if you think about it, it's just even more astonishing how much she accomplished. If you read this book, in addition to discovering polonium and radium, she created an ambulance service carrying X-ray equipment to the front lines in World War I. She isolated and carried the standard, the Curie, I forget how many milligrams of radium it is, to wherever it was. She carried her radium on a train at the beginning of the war, I think to Bordeaux or somewhere safer. So, she just, and she traveled to America twice. She was so sick and so depressed, and she still managed to accomplish so much. It's just amazing, I think.
Well, in the movie, they show her actually going in World War I to the field, and showing doctors who said, she said, I can tell you exactly where you need to operate.
She
And they
did.
said,
Yep.
Yeah, and they didn't believe her. And then she would show them and they started to believe her.
Yeah, that's in my book. I mean, she taught them at that
Yes.
time. It was very dangerous to X-ray people. They didn't have much shielding. They would maybe put on a lead apron, but and they would leave the X-ray bulb on the whole time and wear glasses that with, you know, zinc sulfide or something that helped them see things. But they had to basically, and they would take images sometimes, but they had to be able to triangulate to figure out where the metal was. And she was training doctors. She and her daughter Irene started a whole school to train people how to use this X-ray equipment. They were called like manipulaturesses, I believe. But yeah, she just accomplished an extraordinary number of things in her 65 years. I forget if she was 65 or 66. Loie Fuller was 65. I think Marie Curie lived to be 66. They were very similar.
Well, actually, people thought Loie died much younger, but she had always lied about her age.
Yeah,
Throughout her life. Yeah.
I got a kick out of her. She often did things that weren't so admirable. You know, the New York Public Library has a whole collection of her letters. I mean, she was so prolific. She has notebooks and letters, and she was always arguing with bills and trying to like get out of paying bills and trying to slip out of contracts, but then suing people who she thought did something wrong. So she was very litigious, but she was also she did it all because she wanted to create these dances and do this work and explore the science she was interested in. You know, her science was all basically related to her inventions and her dances, but she was amazing. She also, you know, the second she got into town anywhere, she traveled around doing her dances. She would talk to the press. She loved talking to the newspapers. She would have been great on social media if she were alive now. Like everyone would know who she was.
Yeah, she had a great Twitter account.
Yeah.
But she also had a big feud with Isadora Duncan.
Yeah.
Who was her student.
Who was her student? Yeah, they had a history. Well, Loie kind of discovered Isadora Duncan and took her on tour and introduced her to people. So Loie launched Isadora's career. And then Isadora basically slipped out of her contract, which really made Loie mad, and then became very, very famous, which of course made Loie jealous. Loie always said they always admired each other, but they never got along. And eventually they both had competing dance schools, and they were both the sort of mothers of modern dance. So their dance schools were fairly similar. So they were always competitive. And then later in their life, Isadora Duncan was threatening to expose Loie as a lesbian because Loie lived with another woman named Gab Bloch, who they lived together for decades. They never lived together, but they were partners for decades. And Isadora threatened to expose their relationship. So yeah, they were fighting all the time, but Isadora Duncan died. Do you know how she died? Do you remember?
Yes, the scarf got stuck, right? Yes.
Yeah, she had a tragic life too. Her kids drowned in Paris. Like she died when she was wearing a long fashionable scarf in one of those 1920s cars, and it got wrapped up in the wheel, and she got her decapitated, I would imagine. So yeah, they weren't the best of friends, but they always did admire each other's work. They were sort of the mothers of modern dance. And Isadora Duncan had come to see Loie dance back when she was very young. So at the 1900 Paris Exposition.
So tell me about the Kitchen Pantry Scientist. There are all kinds of, I've seen some of your YouTube videos.
Oh yeah.
So what are you writing books? Are you?
Yeah, so I've written maybe, sorry, that's my email. I've written maybe 8 or 9 books for kids. I'm just finishing up a Kitchen Pantry Scientist series. I have a chemistry book that's out. I have that here. And I have a biology one coming out next month and a physics one coming out next year. But in my most recent books, it's been really fun because I write the biographies of 25 scientists, past to present. And then they're matched up with a project. So so let's see if I can find a good one. Here, I'll find a contemporary scientist. So the chemist, Rachel Burks, who is a pretty popular chemist if you're on social media at all or in the chemistry field. So I wrote her biography, and then she works on colorimetric sensors. And then I have a project paired with it where you can use smartphones to try to, as a spectrometer. So it's all that. It's historical. So I start off, the first person in this is this woman named Taputi, who was a Mesopotamian perfumer to the royal family. So it was a lot. These books are a lot of fun because I get to write scientist biographies, and then but I pair them with projects related to their work. So in my biology book, I wrote about Louis Pasteur, and then I wrote about the swan-necked flask that he used to show that life doesn't, like, things don't just grow in culture medium on their own. So I have made up an experiment with 2 jars with apple juice, and they each have a straw in them. They're sealed off, but one of the straws goes straight up so things can fall in from the air, and the other one's bent like his swan-necked flask, so they can't. And you'll see that one of the jars gets cloudy and one doesn't. So I do stuff like that. And then I do every other week, I do in Minneapolis, St. Paul, I do demonstrate science on television, probably 2 or 3 times a month. I have a regular gig on one of the stations, and then I do the other stations. But I just do a lot of science outreach. Like, here's fun stuff you can do with your kids to get them excited about science.
Okay. So someone asked, are you going to write a children's book about Loie Fuller? Or have you
I should.
written it? Okay.
I should. I haven't, no.
Oh.
I mostly stick to science for kids' books, but that would be cool.
So I think you got something. You think you're going to get a movie deal out of this?
I hope so.
I hope so.
I think
okay.
it would. So I wrote it. It was fun to write because I basically tried to pick scenes out of their lives that to me would seem very visual and interesting. So, Loie Fuller dancing on top of the Eiffel Tower, or Marie in her lab at night with the glowing tubes of radium. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Okay. So one thing I have a question, because there's dialogue in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you made this up.
Yeah, most of it I made up. I actually tried to. Some of it is things I tried to incorporate their own words when I could.
Mm-hmm.
But for Marie, it was mostly when she was talking about science. So when I have her giving a lecture at the 1900 Paris Exposition, she has a short, she only wrote one short autobiography, but I actually took verbatim some of the things she said about radium for that. But yeah, the story is true, everything in it is true, but I invented the dialogue just because I wanted, it's just kind of how I started writing it. I was hoping to draw in an audience who might not typically read science biographies. I think a lot of people either read science books or they don't. And I was hoping I could get some people to read this book who didn't typically read science books. And so I was trying to make it feel more immersive, I guess, more like a story.
You're also writing about a dancer. So this is going to appeal to the dance community too?
That's what I'm hoping. I mean, I think it's nice when you have things that are multidisciplinary and appeal to a lot of people. So I think that's a great way. I do this in my other books too, you can use art to introduce science to kids who might not think they're into science. So I wrote about it. I wrote about the 2 of them because I find both of them really interesting. But I also love when I think people who have friends outside of their own immediate disciplines tend to be more creative. And I like the idea. I don't know how much Loie Fuller inspired Marie Curie, but I know that Marie Curie inspired Loie to do a lot of things.
No, 2 years ago, I went to the Lindau Nobel Laureates Week, which is in Lindau, Germany, and I'm sure they'll invite you, when they have it in person next year, because it's about people. And the 2 days before that in Zurich, they had it was called Stars Muse, which is stars in music.
Oh, cool.
And they had the woman, the last woman, the woman who won the Nobel Prize in physics was there. I'm blanking on her name, Donna something.
Uh-huh.
But also there was Brian May from Queen, who has a PhD, just happens to have one in physics.
I know, isn't that crazy?
And Phil Collins, and they also, it was the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. So they had Buzz Aldrin there and some other people. So I thought this was pretty cool. And they wrote a song for it, and so that was.
I think I heard about that. That sounds cool.
It was definitely cool.
That's one thing that I've really enjoyed about writing these chemistry, physics, biology for kids books is interviewing contemporary scientists, and a lot of them have some background in the arts, or music. So, for example, I interviewed for my physics book that's coming out next year. I interviewed Shonda Prescott Weinstein, and she went to a school for performing arts and is a trained dancer. So I think a lot of people who we tend to just box scientists into these science is a very focused thing. You work on like one little aspect of one little thing. But I think it's really cool to, and especially when you're teaching the public or kids about science, to make scientists more relatable, is to say like, hey, she used to be a dancer, or she loved baseball growing up and wanted to be a professional baseball player. So I think that interdisciplinary stuff is really important for public outreach.
And you were an art major.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I like painting, drawing.
Okay. And also music, right? You play music?
Yeah, I played trombone all the way through college. Now I play banjo. I sing in a garage band. Like I love music.
Okay, that's good. So, so I was just gonna, it says, between experiments of writing, you paint, sing, and you play the banjo. So about let's go. I want to go back to Loie Fuller, and how did she first get in touch with Marie Curie? Because I don't think it was that easy, to meet her.
Well, she wrote her a letter. I think it was easier then to get in touch with people than it is now, actually.
Okay.
Maybe we don't have social media, but yeah, she wrote her a letter, and Marie Curie answered her letter. So.
And the same thing with Edison too. Edison was very intrigued with her.
Yeah, Edison, and I don't know how she met Edison, but Edison wanted to, one of his most famous early films is of the Serpentine Dance, which is Loie's dance. There's a Serpentine dancer, and he wanted to film Loie, but she said no, because he could only film things in black and white, and the color was very important to her. She was sort of obsessed with color, so she said no. But yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I think they had very similar backgrounds. They both grew up in the United States, didn't have much formal education, but they both had a lot of good ideas and worked really hard.
But he made a film about it, but with someone else.
Yes, he used Annabelle, I can't remember her last name. He used a New York actress. But if you look up like early films, it was very famous, very popular.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah. Well, but Edison knew something about patents. He was good at that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting reading the Scientific American issue that the picture I have in my book. I can show you the picture. Because they write, Scientific American, I believe, started out as it was like a patent journal, I think. But Thomas Edison's name was all over that Scientific American, and Loie Fuller really got ignored. Here's the picture of her. But there was an article about her dance that like barely mentioned her, and definitely didn't mention, it just called her a Serpentine dancer. It didn't mention that she had invented all of those lighting techniques or anything. So it was I'm sure it was very disappointing to her to to be so ignored by something she had. I mean, she really struggled, like I said, to get patents in the United States. So I'm sure it was very frustrating. But she did patent one of her dancing costumes. I have that in the book too. She patented these wands that she made to go inside of her costume. But she was not able to patent her dance, and everyone was stealing it.
Okay. Did you go to the New York Public Library to look at these things?
I did. I went several times,
Wow.
and I studied it's the Jerome Robbins dance collection. When I was in Paris, I tried to see some of Marie Curie stuff, but it's basically impossible. You have to request it way ahead. And I did get a library card, and I was able to see some Loie Fuller stuff at the Paris Opera Library, but I went in to try to request to see some of Marie's stuff, and it was just not possible. So a lot of it was radioactive too. They've cleaned a lot of it up, but it's hard to access.
Here's a question. Do you have any future plans for another biography?
Yeah, I do. I have an idea for another one. So,
Okay.
but we'll see.
And someone has a suggestion for you. Are there any scientists who have been important in fighting COVID-19 who you believe will be particularly interesting to biographers?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I did in my biology for kids book that's coming out. I did talk about. Now I'm going to forget her name. No. I do talk about the woman who discovered coronaviruses. June Almeida, I think is her name. And she was an interesting person. There's so many interesting people that you could write biographies of. I've been reading a lot as I write these books and write these short biographies of people. I am so fascinated by their stories. The woman who discovered pulsars has really great story. But I think my next book, because I'm a biologist, I think my next book I might try writing about a biologist or about something related to biology.
Okay. So have you been following you've been obviously following COVID-19 and stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a virologist, I'm a bacteriologist, but I've been following it. I just got super sick from my second Moderna shot. Yeah, it's fascinating. I've always thought that there are lots of interesting people you could write about too, who, the people who study emerging infectious disease. I think that's so interesting. I'm a big fan of David Quammen and his writing about emerging infectious disease. I want to read Carl Zimmer's new book. I haven't had time yet, but I have a huge stack.
We spoke to him.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we interviewed him a couple of weeks ago about his new book. It's
cool.
about life at Life's Edge. Yeah. Twice as long as yours.
Is it really?
Yeah,
wow.
He writes big books. He writes
That's a big book. Yeah.
So so that was, and he's writing about COVID pretty much full time for the New York Times. So,
yeah, I feel like a lot of people are writing about COVID. I don't think there are going to be a lot of books about COVID. Just saying.
I do agree. So let's talk about the historical era, because there's it starts in the 1890s, but then World War I was a big changer for everybody. So,
yeah.
I mean, if you look at the pandemic, the Spanish flu, World War I, actually the end of World War I became a super spreader event.
Yeah.
People partied, they didn't wear masks and all these things. But what happened to Marie Curie and Loie Fuller during World War I? I know Marie Curie was doing the Xrays and helping out.
She was, and it was interesting when World War I started. She had actually sent her girls off to where they vacationed on the coast, and she vacationed with other scientists and their families. So they were there, and she was in Paris, and she was really torn about whether to bring them back to the city or not. Paris was actually more dangerous because it was closer to the war front. And she ended up leaving them on the coast for quite a while when she was moving her radium to a safe place. But eventually Iran came and joined her in Paris and then helped with the X-ray stuff. Loie Fuller was, I believe, on a boat on the way to America when she heard about the war. And she at that time, she was busy bringing Auguste Rodin's sculptures and some other French artists' work to California. She wanted to bring French art to America, basically. So during the war, she did a lot of fundraising for war efforts. But she went back and forth, I think, from between France and the United States 3 or 4 times during the war. She didn't seem to be very afraid of her ship getting sunk, I guess. But
there probably were not a lot. There were probably, put an end to performances and stuff as well.
Yeah, at that time she wasn't dancing much on her own. She after she got to a certain point in her career, she started choreographing and training a group of young students. She had a dance troupe, and she brought her dance troupe from, a lot of them were actually English girls from England, but she brought them to the United States to dance at the 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition. So yeah, she was fundraising for the war. She was actually selling, she was asking a lot of her artist friends to like sign, and Marie Curie to like sign books or sign their artwork and donate it. And she'd take them to the United States and sell them to raise money and then send it back to Europe for, war orphans or whatever particular charity she was working on. And her partner, Gab Bloch, actually drove an ambulance in World War I to the war front. So they were all involved one way or another in supporting France during the war.
Now, the book kind of ends with Madame Curie going to the White House with President Harding.
She was actually at Thomas Edison's, the new museum they built for him.
Right.
At a big dinner there. And Edison, she did go, yes, she did go get radium from the president.
Yeah, but Edison was deaf practically, and
yeah. And that was fascinating. I wished if I had had room, I only could put so many pictures in the book, but if you go online and look, I think it's called, I have to look, it's in the back of my book somewhere, Light's 100th celebration or something. It was the anniversary of Edison first lighting the light bulb he invented, incandescent light. But at this dinner, you can see all of the famous people. Someone did this huge painting of it that's I believe it's at one of the Edison museums now. You can see Marie Curie. You can see, I don't know, I wrote about the people that were there, Kodak, the president. It's amazing the group of people that were there, and you can look up, they have them all identified in the painting. But Marie Curie is just like, you can see she's sitting near the front because she was one of the speakers, but she's just this little tiny woman. She was so old and frail at that point.
I think there were also a lot of people from the financial community, like the Rockefellers.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, so you get the impression that the whole world was kind of, like I told you, before we spoke, it's kind of like, it reminded me of Midnight in Paris, where all these people are just kind of interacting with each other. And then Loie meets Picasso again at some point. And also Rodin sculptures that were nationalized. So she had to send them back.
Yes, she was.
That's a great story. So.
Yeah, she bought lots of sculptures from him. Sometimes she bought them, sometimes she borrowed them and took them to the United States, and then someone else would buy them. Sometimes they get in fights about who had the sculptures. Once she put his stuff in an exhibit with some like sculptures of herself, and he got really mad. But when he died, France, basically, he had moved into a mansion with the agreement, where his museum is housed today, like his main Paris museum, with the agreement when he died, France would get all of his things. So she had been in the process of purchasing some of his sculptures that they had to send back because she no longer was allowed to buy them. And I don't think she got along with whoever was managing, the stuff in his estate at that point. So
she was a complicated person from what you said.
She was. Okay. And he was too. I mean, Rodin had a woman he lived with for most of his life named Rose, but he had always had a different mistress, and whoever he was with at the time would really control access to him. And he was a complicated person too. Not the greatest person, but a great artist.
Great artist, yeah. So the book is Radiant. Where can people get it?
Anywhere books are sold. And
Okay.
the audiobook is really good. The woman who narrated it did a really nice job if you like audiobooks. But yeah, it's science and art, and it is creative nonfiction. As David said, some of the dialogue is invented, but everything in it is based, the story is true. Everything in it is based on the correct dates, things, places, everything that actually happened. I didn't make up anything about the story. So I just tried to enhance it with some creative dialogue.
Oh, it's a great book. It's interesting to read.
Thank you.
It's fun at times. It's sad at times also. I mean, they both, struggled a lot during their lives, but I thought their friendship was interesting. So I just want to do a little plug for us. Next week, I'm going to be speaking to Josh Fishman, who's one of the science editors at Scientific American, the oldest science magazine in the country. And the week after that, we're going to speak to some European journalists about the vaccine rollout in Europe, which compared to the United States is very poor. I mean, the United States, 25% of people are fully vaccinated. In countries like France and Switzerland, it's like 7%. So they've had a very slow rollout for a lot of different reasons. So anyway, I want to thank you for spending some time with us. It was great to get to know you, read your book, and I'm sure we'll talk more. Okay, so thank you, and everyone else, like Liz, get your vaccines and be safe, and see you next week. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to say goodnight. Okay, bye-bye.